are live.
Yay!
We made it this time. We are streaming live. We are trying out a new program called StreamYard. And it's so much easier to go live on YouTube without all the stress.
Yeah, I agree.
So let me know if you guys see me okay right now. I don't think the quality is probably as good as OBS Studio from what we've been using the last couple of days because this is limited to 720p. But it's working. I'm not cursing. No colorful metaphors today.
See, even Shayner's happy.
And I even have my better half with me. She wanted to be part of this video. So this is just a test run. I want to see if you guys like this. I'm going to talk about my favorite AV receivers of all time. And
great, see?
Awesome. I'm going to actually check this out. I could share your comments. Shane says, looking great. Brian says it's working.
Yes.
And Jay Bird says his favorite receiver is already being shown. Yeah, that's the 8500 from Denon that I used for the screenshot. So this is cool. Good morning from Pennsylvania. Hi, Mike. So anyways, I figured I would take you guys on a little journey of my favorite AV receivers all the way back in the 90s, about when I met you.
Yeah.
This is my wife, Bertha. She's the one that does all of our social media. She does most of the posts on Facebook. In fact, guys, we have now over 100,000 followers on Facebook. And 87,000 on YouTube. We're kicking butt. And what do we have on Instagram?
Thanks to you guys.
7,000 on Instagram?
About 8,000 actually.
Wow. Good morning from Norway. Man, we got, oh, this is a different comment. Sorry, I got the wrong one. Good morning from Norway.
Frostification, I like that.
And we got from the land down under.
Anthony B.
Awesome. So, okay. So I wrote this article maybe about a year ago, just recanting my experiences with various AV receivers from the 90s and on, and I figured I'd do a little screen share and go over this with you guys. I'm sure there are some of you that have read this, so bear with me. I've never done this. This is a brand new software for me, never used it. I'm actually doing it as a test run now, so I want to make sure everybody, can you guys see this article that says my favorite theater receivers of all time? I'm going to check the chat just to see if everybody sees it. Somebody is saying their favorite receiver was the Yamaha Dsp A1. Yeah, that's a great receiver. It's actually an integrated amp. It does not have an FM tuner. But that was an awesome piece. So you guys can see my screen. Awesome. Okay. So now you don't have to look at me anymore. Although, you know, looking at my wife is much more pleasant than looking at me, I could say.
I agree.
So, okay, so we've got, I basically started really getting into AV receivers actually when I was in high school. But I started getting serious about audio when I graduated college. I couldn't afford the stuff in high school. But I did manage in the 80s when I was about a junior or senior in high school to buy a Pioneer ProLogic receiver. And I fibbed a little bit on this. I actually had the model below. But I always check this one out, the VSX D1S, when I went to a store called McDuff's. And I was blown away just by, you know, all the bells and whistles this receiver had. It was one of the first that had ProLogic with a center channel. So back in the day, you had Dolby Surround that just had like rear channels without the center channel. This thing put out 130 watts for the front 3 speakers, or the front 2 speakers, and then 40 for the center, and I think 40 for the rears. So we didn't have equal power back then, and we didn't really need it as much because we didn't have discrete surround sound. This is back when we were deriving our channels from matrixed audio content. But it was impressive when you didn't know any better, and listening to demos from the movie like Top Gun in a surround environment in a store was just awesome compared to watching it on your TV. You know, back then we had like 27-inch CRT TVs. So imagine having now the ability to add 5 speakers and a subwoofer for the first time.
My parents loved it.
Yeah, I had this kind of stuff set up with my parents. My parents were always into audio because of me, but also my brothers were into audio as well. But I did have the model below this, and the cool thing about the Pioneers of the time is you see the speaker A and B here. They actually put them in parallel. A lot of receivers of that era would put them in series. So when you would plug in two pairs of speakers, you would, it would divide the power up among both speakers, as opposed to dropping the impedance and driving the actual same power to both speakers. This puts more of a strain on an amplifier, but it sounds better when you can run two pairs of speakers off the same amp in parallel. And I did that. I used to have parties when I was in high school when my parents weren't around. And I would have Cerwin Vega D2 speakers, and my friend would bring over his 15-inch Fishers, and we'd set them up in our living room, and we would be blasting, basically having 4 big speakers playing off this receiver. And it did the job. I mean, it was pretty awesome. So kudos to Pioneer. This was not a cheap receiver. $1,400 in 1988 term. That's probably about $3,000 in today's terms.
That's my kind of receiver. I love the buttons, touch dialing.
Yeah, the tactile. Yeah, the
Tactile
jog
fun.
shuttles. This is back when they had the jog shuttles. They had the jog shuttles on the VCRs. I used to love that.
Love it still.
The JVC VCRs of the day were just awesome with those jog shuttles, and they had the LCD display, or the little display on them. It was just really cool. So that was, my first foray into surround sound using a Pioneer. Well, then when I got a little older and I was in college, I had my own apartment. I wanted more emphasis on sound quality and not so much the surround sound, but just the 2-channel. And I bought a pair of Jbl Lx 44 speakers, which were pretty good. They were based on like the L100s, but a scaled down version of them. Still had the 1-inch titanium tweeter. I started hearing differences in amplifiers because I worked at a high-end shop called Cooper for Stereo, and they let me test amplifiers at home. I was like, wow, I took a Rotel home and I love the sound of that compared to the Pioneer amps. Just controlled the bass so much better in my speakers. I couldn't afford a Rotel amp at the time. So I got this Harman Kardon. And Harman Kardon's always been notorious for, having emphasis on 2-channel audio with their receivers. They touted high current in their designs, that kind of stuff.
They used to.
And they used to, yeah. They don't really make
No.
receivers anymore unless you go with the Arcam brand.
Yeah.
But anyways, the AVI 200 was an integrated amp, didn't have a tuner. I always had this fascination back in the day with integrated amps over receivers. I always felt like they would emphasize the audio quality more, and I rarely listened to radio in the house anyway. So I would always gravitate towards an integrated amplifier as opposed to an AV receiver. Well, I got the AVI 200 and it was sounding great, except for the fact that if you really cranked it, it would shut off. And then I came to find out years later that they had a problem with their relays that they were too sensitive. And when they checked an impedance and it saw it was too low, and you cranked the volume up too high, it would trip the protection circuits. Well, I returned the unit, and then years later, they had a Mark II, which addressed that problem, and they were selling it back then when Harman had an outlet store. They were selling them at discount. So I picked this baby up for probably a couple $100, and it sounded awesome, man. This was a great sounding receiver. I think it was only rated maybe at like 80 or 90 watts a channel, so lower power than the Pioneer was rated, but it sounded so much better. And even the surround modes, like if you use the studio mode, it was like, I think it had the half-lift circuit in it, left minus right, for matrix surround sound. So it actually sounded good for music. So I found myself adding 2 speakers in the rear, and now I had, simulated surround sound that I could listen to for music that didn't sound bad, because back in the day, the only other options you had was basically Dolby Pro Logic, which sounded terrible for music. So these simulated surround modes, like the Stadium mode or the 4-channel stereo mode, actually sounded pretty good. So I really enjoyed this receiver. I loved the green lights on it with the volume control. It was a great piece, and I held on to this. We had this in our bedroom for quite a long time until I gave it to a family member who writes for us, by the way, and he blew it out a week after I gave it to him.
Longevity failed.
So good job, Tony Leota, putting him on the spot, because I loved this product and he blew it out a week after that I gave it to him. So that piece was history. So next up is this Onkyo. My brother actually got this Onkyo, and he was really into home theater, and we kind of had a rivalry growing for a long time. We always try to outdo each other. So he was he was able to get this receiver on a closeout because it was becoming a discontinued model. But this was the first receiver of its era that had all channels rated at the same power. It was 100 watts times 5. This was built like a brick shithouse, man. This thing weighed 30 pounds. This was just a beautiful receiver. It was THX.
I won.
And it sounded awesome. It just really did sound awesome. You could add a Dolby Digital decoder to it. I don't think he had the Dolby Digital decoder, so we were still back then doing non-discrete surround sound. But, you know, this was a great sounding receiver. It was a step down from the flagship of the time, the 919, which nobody could afford. That was like a $2,000 or $3,000 receiver, but everybody aspired to it. But I remember when I sat in his living room and we put on the Genesis We Can't Dance VHS concert, and he put it in a simulated surround mode, and I was just blown away. Like, you could hear the audience echo in the background. He had JBL Pro 3s for his surround speakers, and he had Advent Heritages for the front speakers. So it was just, this receiver filled his room. You know, he had a giant living room, and I was like, man, I really want an Onkyo. It almost made me like second guess why I even had a Harman Kardon at the time, because this thing outgunned that. But obviously it was a different animal. It was more geared towards home theater, whereas the Harman was more geared towards 2-channel. But this was a great receiver, and I really, you know, it made me look hard at Onkyo at the time. I was really an Onkyo fanboy when they came out with products like this. And anybody that got this receiver, especially at closeout, really got a hell of a deal. Because let's face it, 5 channels, 30-pound receiver. Today you've got 7 or 9 channel receivers that weigh 22 pounds. And they're both using the same kind of amplifier technology, class AB. They're both using linear power supplies. So what does that tell you? Back in the day, they put more money towards their power supplies, and they had more heatsink area for less amplifiers. So these things could put out real power, all channels driven. They didn't have too many nannies to shut them off. If you put a 4-ohm speaker, they could handle it. So that's the era of receivers I really liked. Well, I had to outdo my brother.
Oh, I remember this one.
So actually, this is before I met you. You're thinking of the Dsp A1.
Yes.
You're thinking of the Dsp A1. This is the Dsp A3090. Okay, so I initially bought, when I graduated college, I bought an RXV 992 from Yamaha. And that was $1,000 receiver, 5 channels, 80 watts times 5, and it weighed probably close to 30 pounds. And I used it for a couple of weeks, and I was really happy having discrete surround sound for the first time, having a DVD player for the first time, because we used to use VHS back in the day. But something bothered me. I'm like, man, I really want to check out a flagship. I can't afford the flagships. I'm just graduating college. So I went into Sound Advice, and they had an open box of a Dsp A3090. And I'm like, but I don't know if I want to buy old technology. And the salesman's like, you got to take this thing home, try it out, keep the 992 for a while and see which one you like better. Well, when I hooked this thing up, I immediately heard a difference in sound. It was just so much more relaxed sounding, so much more effortless sounding. Even though it was rated at 80 watts times 5, just like the 992, it was a much different power. And I could show you a video where I did the power inflation of AV receivers and how they rate power on the distortion versus power curves. This thing was rated, when it said 80 watts, it was rated to the left of the curve, not to the right where it starts going up into distortion. This was a true 80 watts times 5, all channels driven. The thing weighed 45 pounds, and it just had such a great sound to it. And then I went and I added 2 extra speakers for the DSP effects. So now I was putting on like Pat Metheny or John Schofield CDs, throwing it into concert, not even concert mode, like jazz mode, and you just scale back the DSP modes a little bit, and it sounded awesome. It really did transport you into a venue. I know DSP can be gimmicky, but think of the time when we didn't have a lot of discrete surround sound music. Most of the stuff we were listening to in the late 90s was 2-channel. So imagine now taking that 2-channel disc, throwing it now into a 5 or 7 channel, actually a 7-channel surround, and it just transported you. It was just such an amazing thing. And this was such a beautiful sounding integrated amp. I kept it maybe for about a year, but this is when I started going into my upgrade phase. And then the Dsp A1 was on closeout, and I worked with Sound Device because they had a trade-up program, and that's when I traded it to the DSP A1, which was 100 watts times 5, and it had DTS. This didn't have DTS. This only had Dolby Digital. So as in every aspect, the DSP A1 was a better product, but I still love the 3090. It was my first experience to really seeing the difference in high-end processing for receivers. Now, the other thing that the 3090 had that the A1 couldn't do is it actually recombined bass into the main channels when you didn't have a subwoofer. But when I got the A1 and I didn't have a sub at the time, when I was playing 5.1 or 5.0, there was almost no bass going to the main speakers. So the decoding that the A1 used was different than the one that the 3090 used. So it forced me to actually add powered subs to my system, and that's how I kind of opened my relationship with Yamaha. This is even before I had Audioholics, and I had them troubleshooting why I wasn't getting LFE bass to the main channels on the A1 when I had it on the 3090. So it's just an interesting, like, little insider thing I wanted to share with you guys. This is still the product that I remembered. Like, if I had the option to go back and grab an old vintage AV receiver, I would probably go back and get the 3090 and set it up in a room and just listen to music on it. Take 2-channel music and throw in the DSP, tastefully turn down some of the parameters so it doesn't sound like a German bathtub.
That's some popsicle toes would be nice.
Some Michael Frank's popsicle toes, yeah. This was a great integrated amp. It was like $2,500. It was built beautifully. It sounded awesome.
So everybody had the same experience as you.
Yeah, I wonder. I'm gonna take a break for a second and see if anybody has any comments I want to share. Let's see. This one says, Gene had the Onkyo server back in the day. Now I own a Marantz 6012 for Atmos. Good choice.
Oh, good.
There's a lot of comments here. The Harman curve. Very nice video and audio. Awesome, thanks.
Glad to hear that.
I hope it's comparable to OBS, because this is so much easier. I can literally add people to the stream like it's nothing. The only thing I don't like is it's putting my, like when I'm sharing my screen, is it's putting my image to the side rather than overlaying it. I want to see if there's a way to fix that. So
we're still playing with it, so I'm sure we'll find the next
I wish manufacturers would bring back the super receivers. You know what? I do too, and I've said this before. AV receivers are still my favorite product in home theater, just because of what they have to do in one box. And when they do it, what's that?
Break your back.
Break your back, yeah, if they're 100 pounds like the Denon 5805. But what they have to do is a lot. And if they do it well and they use good components in it, it becomes magical when they get it all integrated into one unit. So don't let anyone ever tell you can't get, you know, top fidelity out of an AV receiver, because if it's done right, like some of these super receivers, they give separates every run for their money.
Yes, they do.
Gene, lately your live streams have been pretty late. Yeah, I know. These live streams are just tests. I don't normally would live stream. I normally live stream at 10 or 11 o'clock Eastern. I'm just doing this now because there's not a lot of people here, so if I screw up, it's not going to be as embarrassing. I could delete it if I need to.
Testing.
Yeah, this is testing. Onkyo was great back in the day. Yeah, they were great back in the day, and they're doing some good stuff now. I mean, some of their receivers now are still class leading in features for the price. I know they had a gaffe with HDMI for a number of years, but since they joined forces with Pioneer and now they're under the Sound United umbrella, they're not going to have HDMI problems anymore. Let me tell you something. Sound United products have the most stable HDMI platform in the industry because of the economies of scale. They've got now 4 or 5 receiver platforms under one roof. So imagine the amount of engineering resources they have going towards that.
It changed every 6 months too.
Yeah, their life cycles are every 8 months usually. Dsp A1 was 110 watts by 5. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was 100 watts by 5. You're right. It might have been 110 watts by 5. Yeah, it weighed 50 pounds. It was a beast. It had 2 rows of heat sinks. Imagine that. They had 2 rows of heat sinks for a 5-channel amp plus the 2 channels for DSP. Now you're getting receivers with 9 or 11 channels on 1 row of heat sinks with giant fans under it because they can't manage that heat. And then they have to add all these nannies, and they have to put the impedance control switches on it and everything else. Don't get me started. You know my view on that. The Denon AVC X8500 is a beast. Yes, it is a beast. Gene, what was the issue with your Yamaha 5200? The 5200, I am going to go forward with the review. The issue was the balanced outputs on the front channels. They have about 20 dB more distortion than the other channels. It's probably not something you're going to hear because at below 3 volts, it's still pretty good. I think the distortion is like minus 70 dB, which is like 0.01%, or maybe minus 80 is 0.01%. But it's not state of the art. I'm not gonna lie to you. You actually get better performance out of the unbalanced outputs. But it's probably not an audible thing, but it is something they're going to address in the model that comes out afterwards, but I'm not sure when that model is going to come out. They acknowledged what I found and they're going to fix it in the next model. So if you're going to get a 5200 and you're worried about that distortion problem, use the unbalanced for the front channels and then use XLR for all the other channels. So you should be okay with that. Let's see. Rocking the RMC1 by Hometheater. It's pretty trouble-free. Love the sound. Wow, you're a lucky one because I've been reading a lot of horror stories about that product with firmware bugs and stuff. And I know there's some YouTubers that are checking it out and found glitches, but I hope they do work it out because it definitely does have a lot of potential. Let's see. There's a lot of comments here, man. The 3080 does not have the same problem. I checked with Yamaha on that. It's just a different circuit path. I thought it would, since they both have the balanced outputs. Actually, I should stop sharing my screen. Sorry about that. Yeah, so the 3080 balanced outputs are actually better than the 5200 balanced outputs. Believe it or not, this is a case where a receiver has better preamp performance than the dedicated processor. Fortunately, sounding not as customer service, definitive as a guy answering the phone that knows nothing about their current products, puts me on hold to answer questions. Oh, that kind of sucks. You know, that's something I should kind of look at. I should probably randomly call some of these companies just to see what kind of service I can get. Yeah, and then maybe do a YouTube video on that. That would be, write that down, because I think that would be interesting.
That'd be pretty interesting. It would be just like that radio show.
My old B&K AVR 5007 puts on 125 times 7 or weighs 65 pounds, I think. Yeah, the B&K receivers were awesome of the day. They basically took their 5 or 7 channel dedicated amps and put it inside of a box and wrapped a receiver around it. They were good, but they did have some problems, you know, some firmware problems and stuff like that. They were a little bit glitchy from what I remember. And it was sad to see them go out of business because they did have some great products. Their amplifiers were just kick ass. And they were an American company in Buffalo, New York. So sad that they are not around anymore. So I'm going to go back to finishing now that I read some of the comments. Hope that we can get my screen back here. Entire screen, allow, boom.
There we are.
Okay, so here's what you guys are probably not going to realize this because, you know, Sony today is really not known for receivers. Their receivers are kind of a joke, to be honest with you. But their displays are awesome. They're fixed pixel displays. Visual. So Sony back in the day with their ES receivers had some great stuff. And their processor, their dedicated processor, my brother eventually got rid of his Onkyo receiver and upgraded to the 9000 ES AV processor. That thing had some amazing DSP on board. In fact, I think it was a step above what Yamaha was doing at its time. The DSP was just fabulous. I wish they would have kept doing dedicated AV pre-pros because they had the resources to do it. But anyway, I was able to get a 7ES receiver. This thing was rated 120 watts by 7, had DTS 9624 processing on board. So that gave you, even though it was still lossy codec, it gave you that extra bit stream for 9624 to give you a little bit better audio. This thing was balls to the walls, man. It had a lot of output power. It was a heavy receiver, old school style receiver. I set up a theater for a friend of mine using all 4-ohm RBH Signature SE speakers, and the amp had no issue driving this thing to reference levels. This was a great sounding receiver. In fact, these were very sought after. The DA 7ES and 8ES were very highly recommended AV receivers from like Sound and Vision, or I think it was called Stereo Review at the time. But this was a great receiver. So if anybody had one at the time, they were doing pretty well. And it was $1,400 back in 2002. So the last receiver, it took me several steps to get to a 5805. Let's put it this way. Actually, before I went to the 805, I switched to separates. I had the Aragon separates, the Aragon soundstage and a 5-channel amplifier, and I used separates for a long time, and they sounded great. The Aragon stuff, you know, American made, before they got bought out by Klipsch, and now they're their own entity again. They had some great sounding stuff, but they didn't move their platforms forward because they were having financial problems and they were going out of business. And they were buggy. There was a lot of bugs in that. So eventually I got back into looking at receivers, and Denon sent me a 5803, which was a 7-channel receiver. And at the time, I was only doing 5 speakers in my room. I jerry-rigged it to run the extra 2 amplifiers in the 5803 to biamp my mains, which I was using the RBH 1266 towers, which had sci-fi and 12-inch woofers. So I had to jerry-rig this thing by using preamp jumpers on the back, and I had a whole procedure on Audioholics on how to do it, and I even calculated how to set the gain so that you would have unity gain for all the amplifiers. And this thing caught on like wildfire, man. Everybody started using this receiver to biamp their speakers because they were mostly doing 5-channel setups. That became so popular that Denon started doing the biamp feature on their receivers that came out after that. Once they did it, then Yamaha copied and did it, then Pioneer, Onkyo, and everybody else followed. So you could thank Audioholics for the biamp feature. We started it with the 5803 and the 3803. It was 3806. It was whatever the receiver was, the 2 receivers of their time. We did it on both of those models. We wrote that in the review, and it got shared around everywhere. ABS forum, everywhere, you name it, it got shared. It got super popular, and then Denon eventually turned that into a feature in their receivers, and everybody copied it. So the 5803 was a great receiver. When I found out that Denon was going to do a model above that, I was as giddy as a schoolgirl. I was like, oh my God. And I got to see like images of this thing before it was released at CEDIA one year, or CES, whatever show we were at. This was a behemoth. I mean, this picture doesn't even do justice to how big it was. This receiver weighed like 90 to 100 pounds, had 10 amplifiers built in, 170 watts times 10, had a giant toroid and 2 E-core transformers, and I think like 120,000 microfarads of capacitance. I mean, this was a behemoth, what was in this thing. And when I bench tested it, I was able to get 170 watts times 5, all channels driven at the time. I was only able to test 5 channels at a time with my test equipment. But everything that this receiver put out in measurements was state of the art. It was just unbelievable. It was like going to almost the noise floor of my measurement equipment. That's how good this thing was. And Denon was doing a lot of balanced circuitry inside of their products at the time. They were using the Burr Brown 1796 DACs, which were some of the best DACs that also did SACD. They were not only doing them differentially, but they were doing them quad differential. So they were doing 4 DACs per channel when you use pure direct mode. This was serious processing. This would put a lot of the high-end stuff to shame. If you look at some of the like so-called high-end equipment of the time, like you look at the Krells and stuff like that, those things were toys compared to this.
Still kind of,
and a lot of them still are. Yeah. But the stigma was, you know, oh my God, it's a receiver, it can't be high-end. That was total nonsense. The stuff, the technology that was packed into this thing was bleeding edge. Nobody could compete with it. It sounded so good. I would put this thing up against almost any separates of the time, and you'd have to spend considerably more. Even though this was an expensive receiver, this was like a $5,000 or $6,000 receiver, $6,000 back in 2005. It not only did 10 channels of processing, so you could have two surrounds sides per channel and then back channels, but you could also do an independent 5.1 in a different room. So when I moved into this house, I actually had this set up as 5.1 or 7.1 in my theater room, and then 5.1 in my bedroom downstairs, and then I added a 2-channel amp. So I could simultaneously, I could be watching 7.1 in the theater room with my buds, and then my better half would be in the bedroom watching, you know, her Spanish soap operas, or
yes, that's true.
or whatever you watched at the time. You know, she
Food
could watch
Network.
it, Food Network. She could watch that in 5.1, independent of me, having no effect on what I'm doing. And it was just so cool. This was such a great receiver in so many aspects. The only two downsides was it was super big and heavy, and it was super complicated to set up, and it was a pain in the ass to program with home automation if you try to use programmable remotes. Well, there was no home automation. I meant programmable remotes. Trying to find all the codes for the different zones and stuff was a nightmare. By the time I had this thing working for all my zones and stuff, it was time for me to upgrade to the AVP separates. So I held on to this probably for, I guess, about 3 or 4 years, and I actually shed a lot of tears when I had to
It was longer than that.
trade it up. Yeah. Well, we got it back in 2005. I probably had it for until about 2008 when I changed it to the Denon separates. So just look at how this thing was built. I mean, I wish they would make receivers like this again. You know, they had these giant output devices. It wasn't these small BJTs. They were like double the width, giant power devices on this thing, 3 rows of heat sinks. I mean, it was such a state of the art. It was an engineering marvel. And I got to meet the guy that designed it, and I just came up to him, I shook his hand, I go, "What you did here is just a work of art." And he was a Japanese fellow, and he was resonating with everything I said, and appreciative that I noticed, because this was just, I don't think this product got enough accolades and enough notice in the industry. And part of the reason why the super receiver is dead today is because consumers can't accept that you could have this level of performance in one box.
Sad.
Sadly, yeah. So, and then I had a couple of honorable mentions here. The Yamaha RX Z1 was a beautiful receiver. That's the one that had that touchscreen remote.
Oh, I love that remote.
That was a Philips.
That was my favorite remote.
Yeah, that was a Philips Pronto.
Person.
The Marantz SR14EX was an awesome receiver. I think I have an article on. No, I have the 18 here. I guess I linked it up wrong. The SR18 and the SR14EX from Marantz. This is before Denon Marantz was under the Denon and Sound United brands, or they were all lumped together. These were completely separate companies. But these were some awesome, awesome receivers. And I'm going to try to stop screen sharing again. Boom. So we are back. Someone said they heard the Food Network, my wife's favorite channel. All right. You know, you got to eat.
And Property Boys.
Property Brothers. Yeah.
Boys. Not property.
Oh, Property Boys?
No, it's Property Brothers back home. Property Boys.
Oh. So you got to eat. You know, when you have an audio hobby, it's not just audio. I like cars. I like performance cars. And we are both foodies. We love good food. I'm a pizza-holic. That's why I'll never have a 6-pack. I'll work out for the rest of my life just so I can eat pizza.
That's true. He does.
How much did that thing weigh? The Denon 5805 weighed about, I'm going to say about 90 pounds, maybe 100. It broke my back.
Yeah.
It hurt. Yeah, it weighed about 100 pounds. It killed.
I remember when you got hurt.
I'm a Marantz fan. I love its sound quality. Yeah, Marantz receivers, the flagships back in the day were just, oh my God. I really miss those kind of receivers.
I do too.
I hope we can get those
again. They don't fail
again.
either.
They do. They lasted a long time. 10 channels in 05. Yeah. You could do a lot with the cool thing about the Denon, the 5805, not to keep talking like I'm a fanboy, but I am.
You are.
You can have full power amp assignability. So if you wanted to make all 10 of those amplifiers go to just front channel assignments, you could, and you could have one hell of a block party. So it was just such a cool product. It really was. It was like one of the first products with HDMI, and I don't know, and it had the BNC connectors on it too. It was just really cool. So I think that's it, my friends. I just wanted to, test out this program.
It's an interesting question, James. Richard Gold, do you think Denon Yamaha will ever recreate the receivers like your old 5805?
No.
Is that even possible?
Let me answer this one first. If you want to go for the best preamp today, what will you buy? Well, I mean, you're talking about like a pre-pro for AVR, right? For AV and HDMI and all that stuff. I mean, if there's money's no object, then I would probably be looking at a Trinov or Datasat or one of those units. But the thing I don't like about those units is they don't have an on-screen display. So you got to do everything through PC or tablet. I was really hoping for the Emotiva RMC1 to be bug-free and have good bass management and work. So that looks very promising just because it has the ability to do all of the cool features that these higher end processors have, and it's upgradable, and it has an on-screen overlay. But so far I'm not too thrilled with all the bugs I'm hearing about it. So hopefully they'll work that out. And there was another question here that you said was good. Oh yeah. Do you think Denon and Yamaha will ever recreate the receivers like your old 5805? No, I don't think they will, honestly. Denon has no reason to, because now they have Marantz and they have Class A. Yeah. I think what you're going to see is you're going to see Class A come out with AVP style of processors under the Class A brand, so they might even take it up a notch if that's even possible. It'd definitely be better cosmetically, and the Class A brand will elevate it because of the brand name itself. Yeah. So people won't mind spending 15 grand on a Class A processor when they scoffed at spending 7,500 on a Denon AVP, which was an amazing freaking processor. So no, Yamaha won't do it either because now they have separates. And if you look at their receiver line, they don't even put 11 channels of amplification in their flagship. Mm-hmm. Because people aren't using it. Most people are not using it. So Yamaha's making products that 95% of people are going to use the features for. So I don't think we're going to see the age of the super receiver come back again, personally. But I could be wrong. You never know.
All the portables ran out, especially with Alexa, Google.
Yeah, everybody's more into just the features and the streaming and stuff like that. I don't think people care as much about the quality level of yesteryear like they do today. Please tell me which power amp you connect the SR8012. The SR8012 actually has really good amplifier section built in already. I honestly wouldn't add a power amp unless you have really power demanding speakers. Maybe a 2-channel amp. I would look at doing like an Outlaw or a monoprice amplifier to supplement it, but you really don't need it if you're just running, especially if you're running pretty sensitive speakers that are, especially if they're 8 ohm speakers. The internal amps on the 8012 are really good. So I think that's about it. Have you done your own measurements on the Denon 8500? No, unfortunately, I didn't get would it pass THX certification. I thought it was THX certified. I didn't bench test the 8500. I bench test the SR8012, and the 8500 should have a good 10 or 15% more power, just because it has 2 more channels of amplification and a bigger power supply. And I know the designers that do those things, and they're pretty conservative. But I probably won't test the 8500. But when the next model comes out, I'll probably take a look at it and dive in. I'm actually waiting for an SR8015 because I have an 8012 in my family room, so I'll probably trade that out for an 8015 and bench test that. Do you know if Sony will release another ES receiver? They're stuck now. Yeah, I don't know what Sony's doing, to be honest with you. I mean, they're not bad receivers. Their new ES line, they're just dollar for dollar. They're not up to the level of what you get with like the Denons, Yamahas, and Onkyos and Pioneers, and so they definitely are not a big player in AV receivers anymore.
They're really all into the visual, especially VR.
Yeah, virtual reality.
Mm-hmm. They are.
When will we have 8K processors? When are we going to really stream 4K content, like uncompressed 4K content? I hate that we're moving up so fast with this technology. Any experience with Bryson power amps? I've never measured a Bryson amp, but I know that they're awesome designs. They're built well. They're with a 20-year warranty. That says a lot that a company would stand behind it. You're paying a lot for that amplifier because you're paying for it twice with that warranty. But sometimes that pays because you want an amplifier to last. If you're going to spend that kind of money, you want durability.
Other speaker.
Let's see. What's up? These 20-year-old energy towers are still going strong in the house. Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. Gene, you once said, oh, wait a minute. Did I read that one already?
No.
Oh, you once said in a review in 8012 that a power stage of 8012 still work even if you connect it with external amps. Yes, they don't have a preamp mode. I'm trying to get manufacturers to offer preamp modes on all their AV receivers that have preamp outputs, at least on the flagships, because what happens is if you're using the preamp outputs of a receiver, the amplifiers are still amplifying. You're just not connecting a load to it. And most AV receivers will reach full power out of their power amps at around 1.2 to 1.3 volts. And most external amplifiers that you buy need at least 2 volts RMS to reach full power. So like if you have an amplifier that has a gain of 29 dB and it's doing 200 watts a channel, you need about 1.6 or 1.7 volts. Maybe some of them could go to 2 volts. Depends on the sensitivity. And what happens is if you start cranking these receivers up and there's no load on the amplifiers, and those amplifiers start clipping, even though there's no load on them, those harmonics can go back into the preamp. So in order to avoid that, they really need a preamp disconnect mode. And I'm hoping we could get Sound United to do that on some of their products, or at least change the gain structure on their power amps. That way their power amps don't clip until 2 volts RMS. Because 2 volts is about what you need to hit most clipping on most power amps.
New Zealand here too. California.
Gene, try to get your hands on a new monoprice processor. Yes, I do want to get that one. That's based on the Datasat. That looks like it's going to be a great piece.
You were in touch with them.
Datasat's a solid platform. It's not buggy, and it's got DRAC already working, which Emotiva does not. And it's going to be $1,000 less than the RMC1. Fully differential outputs on all the channels.
Really kicking it up, monoprice.
They are kicking it up. Yeah, wait till you see this monoprice speaker review we got coming out next week, man. Holy cow, these speakers are good. It's scary that monoprice, the company that was giving you, generic USB mics and cables, is now providing serious audio solutions. So maybe we don't need AV receivers anymore if we got monoprice. Let's see. If you had to endorse Dolby Atmos supported receiver, which would you recommend? I mean, there's a lot of good ones. I think the big players are Denon, Marantz, Yamaha, Pioneer, and Onkyo. I mean, NAD is a cool brand. I mean, they've got some good features. It's pricey, but if you definitely want solid HDMI that's bulletproof, that works all the time, then I lean more towards Sound United products like the Marantz and Denons. But Yamaha's been very bug-free with HDMI, and the Avantage line is pretty solid. What I like about the Avantage 3080 is the fact that it's got the balanced preamp outputs, and you can add a 2-channel amp to that and reroute the other amps for the rest of the receiver, for the rest of the speakers. So it's cheaper than most of the other flagships from like Denon and Marantz. So if you already have a 2-channel amp, then a 3080 makes more sense than maybe an SR8012. Let's see if there's anyone. What about NAD and DRAC Live? That DRAC is one of the best room correction systems on the market. I've not had a lot of experience with it, but I do have a reviewer that's going to be doing a comparison of all the different room correction systems. And I know NAD's about to release, is about to upgrade DRAC on that, which we can't really talk about till CEDIA. So that does look pretty interesting to see. But we did do a video on the NAD processor, the M17, and it did have some HDMI hiccups. So if you want, check out that video. Shane Bolin from Spare Change did that for us on our channel. Let's see. I can't believe how many people are in here at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Well, we got everybody here from Australia.
Techno Dad! I'm using StreamYard, man. This is because of you. In fact, I wish I could add you right now. I don't know I could give you the link, but man, this is a cool program. I have to say it. If I can learn how to use it in 2 minutes, then it's a cool program, because OBS is a pain in the ass. OBS has great quality, but I just could not get it to sync up with YouTube.
You know what I'm funny and happy about? We're not the only ones up in the Eastern time.
Yeah, dude, you're up late, man.
Thanks, usually out.
Guys, check out Technodad's YouTube channel. He's a cool dude. What's up? That's Techno Dad.
Check out his last cartoon videos.
Oh my
Great.
God, man! That
Audiophile?
cartoon video. I got to share that in this
Audiophile.
video. That cartoon video was awesome, my friend. Thank
Guys,
you.
it's on our Facebook already. I shared it yesterday.
You shared it on Facebook
Yeah,
already?
it is,
All
so
right,
you
cool.
can check it out there.
What's wrong with Sony receivers? They're better spec than their competitors for the price and responsible for many advancements in the AV industry. Actually, read the fine print on Sony receivers. We have our Truth and Power movement. If you go on their website, I think all of their receivers are rated with one channel driven at 6 ohms at 10% distortion. So don't be fooled by the specs, my friends. And they're pretty decent receivers. I'm not bashing on them. It's just that they're not being very honest in their power ratings. And they don't really innovate technology-wise in their receivers.
Yeah, we actually have a whole
Why does crossover adjustment step up in 20 hertz increments? That's just a processing limitation. I mean, that's what most receivers offer. You shouldn't need more refinement than that. I mean, in most cases, 80 hertz should be the ideal setup for most speakers, with the exception of maybe your Atmos channels. You can cross them over a little higher than that. But if you start messing with different crossover frequencies and you don't get the bass integrated back into the subs correctly, because some of the processes we tested do not do that, you can cause more harm than good. I'm a big monitor audio fan. Do you have any thoughts on which power amp we use for them? Because you have a match right for these speakers. Monitor audio makes some good speakers for sure. And any, amplifier is cheap these days. You could spend a couple of thousand on a Monoprice or an Outlaw or Parasound. I mean, all of those amps should drive any monitor audio speaker just fine. If a speaker is that hard to drive, then there's probably, issues with the crossover design.
about Anthem. You have a
Anthem makes some good amplifiers too, yeah. Biamping gives you more punch, warmer sound at lower volumes, in my opinion. Yeah, you're right, I agree. If your speakers have the ability to bi-amp and they have a separate kind of bass driver, I have, even though it's passive biamping, I have heard differences. And like I said, when I did that 5803 biamp on my RVHs, it sounded as good to me, to my ears, as my Aragon amplifiers, and that's why I went from separates back to a receiver. So it really depends on application. What's up, Gene? All right, Techno Dad. 4:14 a.m. Yeah. We're crazy being up this. We're crazy being up this late.
fault.
Crazy. I want to be watching some Cobra Kai. You guys watch Cobra Kai on YouTube Premium? It's pretty awesome. Oh yeah, you're in a different time zone, Techno Dad. 12:15.
Oh, he's in California.
Yeah,
time?
please. Trying to help me as I bought an SR 8012 2 months ago. Hey, you're in good hands, man. That's a good receiver.
Hot potato.
You should check out our review. Oh, that's a good question. Build quality wise, the CXA 5200 is better. It's just a beautifully engineered piece.
I like Marantz too.
I like Marantz, but I like the 5200. It just bothers me about that preamp thing that I found, but I still think it's a good processor. I'll let you decide on that, to be honest with you. They're both good. They're both good units. When I measure stuff on a bench, just realize not all the time that translates to audibility. I am going to be connecting the 5200, hopefully before CEDIA. I'll be doing my listening tests on it. I'll compare the balanced and unbalanced. And if I don't hear any problems, then I'm going to conditionally say, go for it, even though measurement-wise, it's not state-of-the-art. The cryogenic freezing cable companies are getting nervous. Don't forget to bless those cables by a rabbi and soak them in kosher chicken fat too.
Yes, that's true. I'll be happy to do it for you.
IMAX Enhanced, any experience greeting from Belgium? Yes, I did hear the IMAX Enhanced demo at the Sound United event, and I have to say it sounded pretty freaking awesome. There's just not a lot of content for it yet, and you have to have an IMAX display, and everything has to be IMAX. So I think it's a emerging technology, but it's pretty infantile right now.
Yeah, 5 years will probably be there.
Yeah. Do you think there are issues with Pioneer Class D receivers? There were issues in the older receivers that use the ICE module, like the SC07 that I reviewed many years ago. it just could not drive 4 ohm loads. It would, above 3 kilohertz, the receiver would go into major current limiting. And I noted this in my review, and I got bashed all over ABS forum because people said you shouldn't test Class D amplifiers full bandwidth like you test a linear AB. And I said BS on that, because it's still an amplifier. It still has to swing voltage over a load. It doesn't matter what classification of amplifier it is. And what happened with that receiver was there was getting speaker companies were getting a lot of field calls that had 4 ohm speakers, especially 4 ohm. A lot of speakers that have 4 ohm, in order to increase the sensitivity for the tweeter, they often would use a 4 ohm tweeter to increase the sensitivity to get more output out of the tweeter. And at high frequencies, it was shutting off those Pioneer receivers. So Pioneer abandoned the ICE module years ago, and they use now a D3 module, which I have not tested, but I have not heard any complaints about. And most of the people that I've heard that had the Pioneer Class D3 amplifier or receivers really like them. So one of these days I'm going to get one in and test it, because I'm curious.
I didn't know that.
Which better sounding film, Marantz or Denon? You say potato, I say potato. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Israel.
But the love Yamaha build quality in the DAX. Yeah, the Yamaha build quality is awesome. And I'm not counting Yamaha out, because they are going to be doing upgrades again. And hopefully in a couple of years, we'll see the 5300 measure perfectly, and I'll be all happy and tell you guys to buy it right away. Man, I can't believe how
We
many...
have somebody from India about the Anthomec MXR, I think.
I was planning to power all 11 channels with external power amp above 140 watts per channel. It's more than... Will it work or without pressure? The SR8012 preamp. Just realize, if you're going to get an amplifier that's, 10 or 20 watts more than the internal amps of the receiver, you're not going to get a whole lot of more output. What you are going to do is kind of free up the receiver from not taxing its power supply much. I would tell you, why are you doing that? Why did you get a receiver that you're now going to not use any of the internal amps for? If you do have demanding speakers, maybe the front 3 speakers are the most important to upgrade your power. Get a 3-channel amp. Go get a monoprice 3-channel amp, a 200 watt amp, or get an even more powerful amp. Go get a Parasound. Parasound has 400 watt amplifiers, and just concentrate on adding more power to the front 3 channels. Or if you only have 1 sub in your system, go ahead a 2nd sub before you start upgrading the power amp, because bass is everything, my friend. Do not be using a system like this with 1 sub.
Especially properly balanced bass.
The properly balanced bass is right, yeah.
Bass management, we have a video on that too.
Love all your work, Gene. Thanks for the input. Thank you. There are no receivers with Dolby volume anymore. I missed that from the old Harman Kardon. Well, you have, I mean, there's so many different compressor technologies and receivers now. Yeah, there are, like, each receiver has their own flavor of that. So I don't know if that's something that's really missed or not, because like Odyssey has a version, and Yamaha has their own version. So I can't really say much about that, because I think there's so many different options out there now. Everybody has their own way of doing a night mode, or some type of limiter. Let's see. I am going to be cutting this off eventually. Cobra Kai is great. Have a great stream. Talk later. All right, man. Awesome. Man, I just can't believe this. Comments coming. How are there so many people watching at this time of night? It's crazy.
We're hitting all the different time zones, night and day.
I'm a pretty happy person. I got a Denim 8500, so amazing. Yeah, you should be. That's a kick butt receiver that has every type of connection you could ever dream of needing. And it's upgradable eventually to HDMI 2.1. For XLR for 5-channel, I would again look at the Outlaw. I think Outlaw's got some good solutions in the same price range. There's a lot of good amplifiers out there. I do think Monoprice and Outlaw have the advantage right now for 5-channel amplifiers for the money.
Yeah, they do.
But if you want to go up a level, then you look at something like a Parasound, or some of the Anthem models. There's amplifier technology is matured, and it's hard to get a really bad amplifier. You got to really struggle to find a bad amplifier.
We have a new here, Majid Siddiqui. First time he's chatting on YouTube, and he loves our work.
Where's that one at?
Majid Siddiqui. Go up one more. You just missed it. Right there.
Here we go. It's our first time chatting on YouTube. All of your work, all your videos are helpful. Thank you. Jeline Ho, Fort Lauderdale. Oh, you're in Florida.
See?
Love husband and wife team. Jean is one sub. If one subset means to large, if two subsets is small, my favorite channel. If one subset means to large, if two subsets is small. I don't know what that means. But thank you. Yeah, maybe send another comment about that. It's only 11:30 p.m. in Alaska. Man, we were just talking about Alaska.
My best friend is actually heading there for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Alaskan tour.
I want to go to Alaska. Should I sell my
Me too.
8012 and switch to an 8805 with external power amp? Sir, that depends on how much power do you really need. Take our power quiz. We have an article on that when it's time to upgrade to your AV receiver to a power amp. It depends on your listening habits, the size of your speakers, the size of your room, the efficiency of your speakers, that kind of stuff. Are you a DTS-X or Dolby man? DTS-X and Dolby Atmos are, in my opinion, equally good for discrete audio, but when it comes to upmixing, I think the Dolby upmixer is absolutely superior to the DTS-X one for two-channel upmixing. The DTS-X two-channel upmixer is atrociously bad for music. Horrible, just horrible. I don't know how anyone can use it. There's no way of doing a center spread, so you can have your imaging back for your main channels, whereas the Dolby has center spread feature on and off. Dolby's older upmixers had that feature and they just forgot about it. And I don't understand why they did that. So please, DTS, fix your upmixer for music. You install a new ceiling speakers, what layout would you use for Atmos or something else? I would set up my speaker layout for Atmos because there's very little content for Auro 3D.
Especially here in the US.
Hey Gene, I enjoyed the Harman Kardon 3490 integrated amp every day. I remember your glowing review. Yeah, that was an awesome receiver. My neighbor has that receiver in his bedroom system using some RBH towers. That is a great receiver. And yes, Harman receivers went downhill after that. And they don't even make receivers anymore. So enjoy that one, my friend. That's one of the last greats from Harman Kardon.
Safeguarded.
What's with the 5th foot? Oh my God. You know, they still try to sell me on that 5th foot. Every time I have a call with Yamaha, they keep touting how great that 5th foot is.
This is like 3 days ago.
Yeah.
You talked to
They, you know, because they put it underneath the transformer to help break up resonances. Well, then make your plates thicker. I mean, come on. That 5th foot thing is just going to be an ongoing joke with Yamaha and me. They're never going to convince me of that. Just like their audiophile fuses that they used to promote years ago that you don't hear about anymore. I don't hear about their audiophile fuses. I wonder what happened with that.
Should ask.
You start connecting an ad to an SR2 for front, left, and right channels. Yeah, you can. That's a good idea. That's a good amplifier. What are some speakers that claim 8 ohms and have a forum tweeter? Well, the Infinity Promise P363 that everybody raved about, I gave them a pretty favorable review. But they definitely cheated the impedance curves. They used a really crappy forum tweeter in terms of its motor structure. It's just embarrassing that Harman would use a tweeter like that. But they did manage to make a speaker that sounds pretty good, and you can get them at Fry's for like $200 or $300 a pair. So I can't really bash Harman for that. It was a budget speaker, but they did some clever tricks to get the sensitivity of that speaker up. And one of the tricks they used was to use a forum tweeter in an 8 ohm system. And I don't like seeing that, but it worked for this case. And we need to be wrapping this up.
Ooh, we have South Africa here as well.
If you put a pork chop on the amp when it's on. Oh, okay. That sounds interesting. Well, some of these receivers could get hot enough to
Fry some egg.
Yeah.
A lot more than that. London, we have some Londonians here.
These comments are not ending. Holy cow,
well, I'm
man.
glad everybody's enjoying it and able to get in and see us, hear us.
Oh my God. I think I'm going to cut it because Cobra Kai is calling to me. Are you team Cobra Kai or are you team Miyagi-Do? Because right now I'm kind of leaning more towards Cobra Kai myself.
I'm Miyagi-Do.
You're Miyagi-Do?
Yeah.
Oh man.
I think I need a fusion of the two.
Daniel LaRusso was the true bully in Karate Kid. I'm telling you. Watch the video on it.
Watch the perspective
Yes.
of the other guy, whatever his name is.
Do you still have the store? No, we don't have a store. We have an Amazon affiliate store now, and it's a branded store. So I try to put products in there that we've either reviewed or we've had good experiences with. And it's linked up in our YouTube videos. So check that out when you can. And I'm going to wrap this up because I think you're tired too, right?
I'm getting there.
Well, this was her debut here for us. So hopefully you can be.
How did I do? I should ask.
Yeah. Hopefully we could have you again. Maybe we'll talk about some movies or something like that.
Yeah, let us know how you feel about that movies.
Yes.
Vinyl tracks.
Movie reviews. Yeah, we'll think about doing
DVD,
some more of that.
Blu-rays.
So. All right, guys. Enjoyed being here discussing this stuff with you. I hope that the stream was good quality because this is a really easy program. I can't believe we've been live for an hour. That's crazy. I was really going to just do this for a 10-minute video. So
I never believed.
I know there's a lot of rambling on this video. I apologize for that. So anyways, I hope everybody has a good night. And until next time, keep listening. Again, this is the second time we've said that.
Man, those questions really pop.